Yeah, I think Glasgow, like a lot of European cities who'd kind of relied on an industrial economy, and that was kind of falling apart. The factories were closing, especially in Glasgow. The shipyards all closed, which meant there was an awful lot of unemployment. And the inner city housing that people had lived in for 100 years was all being knocked down and destroyed, and people were being moved out to big housing schemes. So it was a time of great change, really. So there was not a lot of money about at all at that time, and I think Glasgow itself didn't really know what it was. It sort of lost its purpose. It wasn't a big industrial city anymore. It had to find a new kind of identity, which took 10 or so years to do. And like a lot of European cities, it had to kind of reinvent itself. So at that time, people didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know if they were ever going to have jobs again, if Glasgow was ever going to be somewhere that people wanted to go or something like that. So it was quite a turbulent time, and people's politics got a bit more polarized. People were a bit either there's a lot of extreme socialism and all this kind of stuff. A kind of a pattern, I suppose, across Europe about that time. So people were just generally wondering what was going to happen. They were unsettled. So yeah, I wanted to be glad, and I thought I could write a book about social housing, and then I thought nobody's going to read that. So I then, because what I really wanted to do was talk about all of Glasgow, so the really poor bit, the rich bit, which people don't really realise. And I thought, if you write a book about people who work in an accountancy office, they all kind of have the same income, they live in the same kind of house, it's all quite settled. But I thought a policeman can go in and interview a homeless person one day and a somebody the next day. They move all around the city in all the different economic and social areas. So I thought that would be a good sort of Trojan horse to talk about Glasgow. It's not that different. Glasgow city centre is now like this. It's all H&M and, cappuccinos and all very nice. But if you move out a little bit, it's still like it was. There's still awful lot of poverty in Glasgow. There's a lot of people who are 1 month paycheck and going under. It's not that different. Cosmetically, the city itself looks a lot better, and it's been cleaned up. And as I said, it's like every other European city. It has all those hotels and shops that everyone has here, but you only have to go a couple of miles, along a road, and suddenly you're in a completely different kind of city altogether. So that, I think, exists. That still exists very much today. And a lot of when I was doing research for the book that's not out here yet, the book described Britain, I went to speak to the Salvation Army because it was a bit about the Salvation Army. And the man said to me he was terrified what was going to happen to people because, they work about a year in advance. And he's like, and at the time they were running a sort of soup kitchen thing. And the people that came to it were not in any way homeless people. They were just normal, like grandfathers with little kids, looking after them during the day, women, men, they weren't what you'd imagine people who use a soup kitchen. So it's pretty grim out there. So yeah, as I said, it's changed, but not that much. Well, it was interesting. I was looking, often, I don't know if it happens here, but if you have a very high profile trial in Britain of something that's sort of grisly, you always get these people outside the courthouse, with signs, and they take their kids with them, and, they shout and they scream and they try and batter the van and all this. And you sort of think, what would possess you to do that? These people have largely been charged; they're not found guilty. It's not that yet. And you sort of then think, well, what if their plans went exactly right and somehow the back of the van door fell off and the person fell out? What would they actually do? How much of it is theatre and how much of it is actually reality? I mean, do they actually want to get hold of these people, or do they just want to be seen to be, outraged? So, when you look at those things, and there's real kind of hatred in people's faces, like hysteria, and it's kind of frightening because, as I said, it's the people concerned have often just been charged; they're not guilty, or yet they may or may not be. And it's kind of the same thing, I suppose, now with social media. It's easier to jump in and not wait for the actual truth to just pile in and, go nuts about something. So I think that was a kind of interesting idea about what if the reality happened, if they did get a hold of someone, what would happen? I don't know. I mean, I think those kind of people have always been there. They're probably there at bloody hangings and, Marie Antoinette getting her head chopped off. I'm sure that's always been there. I don't think it's much to do with justice. I think it's more to do with kind of hysteria, really. I'm not sure they're particularly interested in seeing justice being done. I think they're just particularly interested in trying to batter someone who they think's done something. So I don't think justice is their problem. I don't think they think the justice system isn't working. I think they just think, well, what a horrible guy, I want to get him. It's not the most sophisticated of approaches, but I think that's probably what it is. Yeah, definitely. I mean, people that are very law-abiding and very are not the most interesting. You have to people that are a bit transgressive, and I think he's interested in the kind of long game. If it takes him having to do something, to get to get justice for someone, he will do it. Maybe in a way he's as bad as people outside the court, but I think he's got very definite ideas of who the establishment don't really take care of. They've sort of marginalised people, and I think he tries to look out for them and try and get the police system to work for them. Because they're often kind of neglected, and their problems or crimes against them aren't really seen as that serious, So I think he tries to make sure that they get a good roll of the dice as well, I think. To be honest, when I wrote the first book, I had no intention or idea of it being a series. I just wrote the book. So, that's just a little bit of his life, you don't. So then you suddenly realise you you have to keep going. So his life and what's happened to him and what he does becomes a bit more important because you've got to sustain, 6 books or whatever it is. So you kind of dig a bit deeper into his life, and I kind of think he's got this big life over here, and I'm just discovering little bits of it, whereas actually I'm making them up. He's got no life, he doesn't exist, but you kind of feel like you're mining, someone's own life to get things. And at a point, the you start to feel a bit like he's a kind of whole character, a person really, which is kind of nuts because all that exists is on the paper. There's no life, but you kind of think sometimes that there is. But people say to me, oh, what was he like in his 20s? I'm like, no idea. I don't know. I haven't thought about it. But I suppose sometimes maybe I will. So it's an odd one. It's I can kind of go into the rhythm of them quite quickly, and get it going, and that's become easier, I suppose, the more you know them, and you sort of know what they do. But then you have to make them do things you don't think they're going to do, so you have to react in different ways. Otherwise, it all just gets very predictable, So you have to kind of give yourself a shake and go, we have to find something new about him here, rather than just, oh, here he is again, So, I have 2 favourite books. One is The Stand by Stephen King, which I love so much. And the other one is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. It's a slightly different kettle of fish. But they're both books, I think I probably read them about the same time. And I can remember being incredibly affected by both of them. I was really, the end of Heart of Darkness, I was really shocked and kind of a bit shaken, and that doesn't happen often. The only other book that I felt about that was The Road, the Cormac McCarthy. I sort of finished that and go, God, that was, quite a something, And The Stand is just a brilliant book. It's a kind of I don't think it's nuclear, just kind of post-viral sort of, dystopian. But it's kind of the best one, and it was probably one of the first ones, well, not really, but, of this time. And he just, Stephen King, because he literally writes a book about every 20 minutes, nobody really cares very much. But he's incredibly good at characters in a really short space of time. He sets up characters 2 or 3 sentences, and you really get it. And The Stand has probably got 100 characters in it, but they're all individual, separate people. And I think that's an awful lot harder to do than people think it is. You know, it's very difficult, and without having those characters, if there'd been books that thick, you just wouldn't read it. You wouldn't care. You know, you'd be like, oh great, someone. You know, so I think he gets a little. He doesn't get undervalued in that he sells 50 billion books and everyone thinks he's great. But I think literary wise, he gets a little bit undervalued. I mean, he's got a lot of. You know, he's got some things in common with Robert Carver or something. You know, that dirty whatever they called it, dirty realism. You know, it's kind of American life that isn't on either coast. You know what I mean? It isn't New York or LA. He's really good at it, I think. So